There's a quiet kind of pain that overthinkers carry. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand attention. It lingers like an invisible weight pressing on the soul. It's the pain of noticing too much, of hearing what wasn't said, of feeling what others avoid, of catching details that slip past everyone else. It's like having a radio in your head that never turns off, constantly tuned in to the subtle frequencies of life. Picture this. You're sitting at a dinner table. The mood is light. People are laughing about the weather, sharing gossip, throwing in casual jokes. Everyone is playing along, staying on the surface. But then you say something real, something deeper, maybe a truth about life, maybe a genuine feeling, and suddenly the room changes. The laughter dies. Chairs shift. Someone clears their throat. And in that silence, you feel it. That small rejection, that subtle discomfort. It happens more often than you admit, doesn't it? Because the truth is, depth makes people uneasy. The psychologist Carl Jung understood this perfectly. He believed the deeper you go into your own mind, the harder it becomes to fit neatly into the world around you. Not because you're broken, but because the world often prefers illusion over truth. Society rewards conformity. It rewards those who nod along, smile on cue, and pretend to be fine even when everything inside them is crumbling. But overthinkers? They can't do that. They can't unsee what's false. They can't ignore the patterns hiding behind fake smiles or empty traditions. Jung once said, "The more intelligent and self-aware a person is, the more they suffer from the general unconsciousness of society." It sounds like a compliment, but it's not. It's a warning. Because in a culture that avoids depth, being self-aware isn't always a gift. It's often a curse. Think about childhood. While other kids are playing without a care, the overthinker is already asking questions. Why do adults lie? Why are these rules here? Why does love sometimes feel conditional? And instead of real answers, they're told things like, don't ask too many questions. Just do what you're told. Why can't you be like the other kids? So they learn to stay quiet. They learn that honesty makes people uncomfortable. But inside, the questions don't stop. They just grow sharper, heavier, more complex. By adulthood, the overthinker has built entire inner worlds, layers of thought, feeling, observation, reflection, but the external world, it rarely has room for that. At work, they're told to stick to the script. In relationships, they're told they're too intense. On social media, they're told to stay positive. So they hide, not because they want to, but because they've learned what happens when they don't. Jung believed society fears what it doesn't understand. And overthinkers are deeply misunderstood. When they express a complex idea, people think they're showing off. When they sit in silence, people assume they're judging. When they speak about trauma, they're called dramatic. When they ask questions, they're dismissed as overthinking. But here's the truth. They're not overthinking. They're seeing clearly. They're observing what others miss. They're feeling what others avoid. And that clarity makes people uncomfortable. Not because it's wrong, but because it's right. Overthinkers speak truths others spend entire lifetimes avoiding. They shine light on shadows people would rather keep buried. They remind others of what's missing, and that reminder is painful. That's why they're often met with resistance, mockery, or distance. Not because of who they are, but because of what they represent, a mirror. Jung called this the encounter with the shadow. Most people don't want to meet their shadow. So instead they reject the person who reflects it. That person is often you. Think about the times you tried to warn someone. You saw a destructive pattern. You told them the truth, maybe gently, maybe bluntly, and instead of gratitude, they gave you silence, or anger, or they simply disappeared. You weren't being negative. You were being real. But real is dangerous. Real doesn't sell. Real doesn't entertain. Real makes people think, and thinking hurts. As Jung put it, most people don't really think. They just rearrange their prejudices. They repeat what they've heard. They defend what they were taught. They perform. Overthinkers, on the other hand, deconstruct. They question. They rebuild. They stay up at night wrestling with contradictions. And while they seek understanding, they often lose approval. That's the tragedy of awareness. The more awake you are, the more isolated you feel. Even so, most overthinkers still try to connect. They try to dim their light to make others comfortable. They soften their words so they don't scare people. They nod along to conversations that don't interest them. But deep down they know it never really works. Because truth has a frequency. And once you vibrate at that level, you can't go back to pretending. So where do you go from here? How do you live in a world that fears the very thing you are? Carl Jung had a term for this: mass-mindedness. The idea that most people don't think for themselves. They absorb whatever culture hands them. From birth, you're given a script. Here's what's good. Here's what's bad. Here's success. Here's failure. Smile even when you're sad. Be polite even when you're disrespected. And if you follow the script, the world applauds. You're called well-adjusted, a mature, successful. But question it. Ask, why are we doing this? Say, this doesn't feel right. Suddenly you're the problem. You're too sensitive, too difficult, too negative. But the truth? You're not too anything. You're awake. And the world fears what's awake. Think back to your earliest days in school. Were you rewarded for creativity, for asking thoughtful questions, for noticing things no one else did? Or were you rewarded for memorizing answers, staying quiet, following rules? For most overthinkers, school is the first place they feel the weight of conformity. Rows of desks, authority dictating right and wrong, little room for curiosity or exploration. It's not built for deep thinking. It's built for compliance. Because compliant people are easier to manage. They're predictable, profitable. And so the lesson begins early. Don't think too deeply. Don't ask too much. Just follow along. But for overthinkers, that's impossible. When an overthinker walks into a room, they carry a presence. It's a stillness, not empty, but full. A gaze that doesn't just look, but sees. People feel it. They feel seen. And for someone who's spent their entire life hiding from themselves, being seen is terrifying. So they push the overthinker away, not because they're cruel, but because self-protection feels safer. And this is how the world ends up labeling overthinkers as loners or weird. Not because they are, but because they're tuned to a frequency most people can't hear. As Jung said, loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. That line hits hard, doesn't it? Because how many times have you wanted to talk about something real, meaning trauma, purpose, only to be met with silence or small talk? How many times have you seen through someone's mask but kept quiet because you knew they couldn't handle it? How often have you dulled yourself down just to be understood? That's not connection. That's survival. And survival comes at a cost. You start to wonder, maybe I am the problem. Maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I should just stop thinking so much. But don't, please don't. Because the moment you abandon your depth is the moment you abandon your soul. Carl Jung believed that the world's greatest hope lies in people, willing to stay conscious in an unconscious society, brave enough to question even when it hurts, brave enough to stay awake even when sleep looks tempting. And if you're still listening, that's you. There's another side to overthinking that rarely gets talked about. It's not just about asking questions or noticing too much. It's about carrying weight that doesn't even belong to you. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt the tension in the air, even before anyone spoke? Or had a conversation where you could tell, just by the tone of someone's voice, that they were hurting even though they said, "I'm fine"? That's the life of an overthinker. You don't just hear words, you hear the cracks between them. You don't just see faces, you see the masks people wear. And without even trying, you carry pieces of their pain. Carl Jung had a term for this: projection. People unconsciously throw their unresolved emotions onto others, and overthinkers often become the canvas. Why? Because they're safe. Because they're empathetic. Because they see things others can't. But here's the danger. When you're constantly absorbing the emotions of others, you slowly disappear. Your own voice gets drowned out. Your own needs blur. You start living as the healer, the listener, the strong one. And in the process, nobody notices that you're exhausted. It's not that people mean to drain you. It's just that when someone finally feels seen, they cling to that light. They come to you again and again, but when you need someone, silence. You've been there, haven't you? And so slowly you begin to feel hollow, not broken, just emptied out. That's why many overthinkers live in a cycle of burnout, not from physical work, but from carrying too much emotional weight. Jung believed this wasn't an accident. The unconscious world doesn't just ignore depth, it exploits it. People are drawn to it, but also afraid of it. So instead of honoring your depth, they extract it. They take your calm, your insight, your energy, but they rarely give it back. And when you finally set a boundary, when you finally say, "I need space," suddenly you're called cold, selfish, or distant. But here's the truth: your silence isn't rejection, it's survival. You're not cold, you're recharging. Because being awake in an unconscious world is draining. Think about media. The average person is bombarded with thousands of ads every single day, and almost every ad whispers the same thing: you're not enough. Buy this, fix that, become more. Most people take it in without thinking. But you notice the manipulation. You see how fear is used to sell safety, how beauty is marketed as worth, how distraction is disguised as entertainment. And even if you know it's all fake, it still wears you down. Because overthinkers don't consume passively. They process. They analyze. They reflect. Even scrolling through social media isn't passive for you. Every post sparks a question. Every photo makes you wonder what's real and what's staged. Every headline becomes a thread you can't stop pulling. And that constant processing takes energy most people don't even realize exists. So you get tired, not just physically, but spiritually. And that fatigue makes you question yourself. Why do I feel so drained when I haven't even done much today? But the truth is, you've been working all day inside your head. Society doesn't reward that kind of work. It rewards output, performance, numbers. So in school, overthinkers are called distracted or daydreamers. At work, they're labeled as unproductive or too philosophical. In relationships, they're told they're too intense or too sensitive. But the reality is, they're simply real. And in a society built on pretending, being real is revolutionary. But revolutions don't come easy. You lose friends. You lose opportunities. Sometimes, you even lose yourself in the struggle of trying to fit into a world that doesn't value what you bring. And yet, even in that loss, there's something powerful. Because every time you refuse to conform, you plant a seed of truth, not just in yourself, but in others who are watching quietly, wishing they had the courage to do the same. Jung said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." That's what makes overthinkers different. They look inside. They awaken. And that awakening, though isolating, is also liberating. But let's be real, awakening doesn't mean peace. It means carrying contradictions. It means feeling both the beauty and the tragedy of life at once. It means noticing the pain in someone's smile and the hope hidden in their tears. It means refusing to numb yourself even when numbing would be easier. And yes, that path can feel lonely. But loneliness isn't the end of the story. Solitude is where you finally meet yourself. Solitude is where you realize you were never too much, you were simply too real. For a world that runs on illusions, the turning point for most overthinkers comes when they stop asking, "Why can't they understand me?" and start asking, "Why am I trying so hard to be understood by people who don't even understand themselves?" That shift changes everything. Because then you stop chasing approval. You stop bending your truth to be digestible. You stop apologizing for your depth. And in that space, something beautiful happens. You start attracting people who are wired like you. They're rare, but they exist. Other deep thinkers, other questioners, other souls who crave meaning over performance, honesty over small talk, presence over distraction. And when two overthinkers really meet, the world feels less heavy. The illusion cracks a little. The soul breathes a little easier. That's why you can't shut yourself off. That's why you can't bury your depth just to blend in. Because someone out there is waiting for the very truth you carry. Someone is waiting for a mirror that makes them feel less alone in their thoughts. Jung believed each of us has a task, a psychological destiny. For overthinkers, that task isn't to please everyone. It's to awaken the few, to reflect what others can't see, to carry light into places most people avoid. It's not a comfortable task. There's no map, no applause, no easy reward. Some days you'll feel cursed. Other days you'll feel invisible. But listen closely. That emptiness you sometimes feel, it's not failure. It's space. Space for something greater to emerge. Because the moment you stop being who the world expects, you start becoming who you truly are. And that's when life really begins. Overthinkers aren't here to be popular. They're here to be medicine. Not in some grand heroic way, but in quiet ways. The way you listen without judgment. The way you ask questions no one else dares to. The way you refuse to look away when truth is staring you in the face. That is your gift. That is your power. And the world needs it even if it doesn't know it yet. So let them misunderstand you. Let them call you too much, too sensitive, too intense. Smile gently and keep going. Because in the end, it's not about being understood by everyone. It's about staying true to yourself. And if these words made you feel a little less alone, then you already know there are others out there like you, waiting, searching, hoping. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are simply awake in a world that would rather stay asleep.